there is another already subject dominating news nowadays, yes? The pandemic is an old story. It's not over not in any sense. It's already improved. There are more people sick than ever. There are more people getting sick in different states, and that's why we're still wearing masks and we are protecting ourselves. We're not forgetting about. But what is dominating subject today? Discrimination, racism, and Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. People argue. These arguments that people get caught up in are so sometimes funny, almost. Yeah, you think about important things, but the way people interpret them, they become funny. That's why I want to preach about interesting subject for us today, because we kind of often we get a message, and once we start preaching a certain side of that message, nothing else matters. And we can miss important things. So is racism real? Is it real for you in your life? Are you discriminated every day? But it's real for somebody else, yeah? If you read the news, there is real stories of discrimination. Unfortunately, there are still people in 21st century that they truly hate people based on their appearances. And they can act based on those ideas that they have in their hatred, and they can create a trouble, yeah? So racism is a real thing. What is racism? I looked up in dictionary. It says a prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or a people on the basis of their membership or a particular racial or ethnic group. Racism is kind of a big word and included in itself a lot. It's a prejudice, discrimination. Everybody experienced, I believe, in life some kind of discrimination, yeah? Maybe we're not experiencing here racism so much, but discrimination, everybody experienced that, yes? And I would say today, unfortunately, we even have discrimination in the church. We even have discrimination on spiritual things in church, to each other. And that's what we will be talking about today. But do you remember first discrimination in Bible? Who would like to remind me? Yes. In Genesis, the very first book of Bible, let's open Genesis chapter 3 or 4. Let's see here. Yeah, chapter 4. Adam had, verse 1 says that Adam and Eve had a first son. His name was Cain. And then she bore a son again in verse 2. And then named him what? Abel. And it gives us a little bit the description about these two first sons of humanity. Abel was a keeper of a sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. You see, from the beginning, God, when the two kids were born in the same family, they were already different on things, yes? One loved to do things with the soil, tilling the ground, and another loved to work with livestock, with animals. And that's a difference, you see? But what difference creates when the sin is present? God created us different. On purpose, He created us with choice, with freedom. And that's why it shows here that they had different desires to do different things, yes? But when sin present, the root of sin, and there is a little bit difference between me and my brother, what that do? People start looking at each other funny, I would say nicely, yes? That there is a discrimination basis right there. What happened? Cain brought offering, fruit of the ground to the Lord, and Abel brought a firstborn of the flock. And the Lord respected Abel. And we know more this story. The Lord asked specifically for certain things, but not everybody wanted to obey. So what happened? Cain started discriminating against his own brother on the basis of favoritism. So he accused God that God was being discriminative to him. He did not accept it his, and since that I can discriminate against my brother. That's a thinking of the sinful nature, you see. And what happened as a result of that? 8. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose against Abel his brother and killed him. You see, the Bible verse is very short, this, but that's a long period of time I believe is described here, because based on different studies that we have, like when we read about Israel now, in Bible we just read one Bible verse, yeah? Then we go to outside reading and we read about those events, and years could have gone in that single Bible verse, you see? So here what do you see? Cain talked with Abel his brother. They had this kind of life together, who knows for how long. It wasn't one day. It was prolonged. They had the opportunity to work out things and understand each other. You see what I'm trying to say? But the result of that all discussion and living together was what? Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. So this is just, I don't want to preach about. We can preach about that subject today. It's a beautiful subject and one can study that as well. But that's the first discrimination in Bible. And from that moment there are so many examples and everything starts. And you go to Abraham and he has 2 sons. And sons start discriminating against each other. And they have their followers, that everybody discriminating against each other. People of Israel come on picture, and all the people surrounding them, they hate them, and all are they related in a sense, yeah, because they come from the same father Abraham. But they all killing each other till this day. Till this day, brothers and sisters are killing each other, and not only in the Middle East, but it's all around the world. All around the world is discrimination. But unfortunately, sometimes we are discriminative in our messages or in the way we study Bible too. This is only introduction. I read an interesting example that will be interesting to share with you today in the light of this study. There were 2 apples on a tree, on the apple tree. And they were looking down around them, and they could see beautifully, like Moses from the mountain. When you are high, you can see lots of things going by. So on top of this high tree, they could see beautifully everything that's going on around. And one apple said to another, "Look at all of those people fighting, robbing, rioting. No one to seem to get along with his fellow man. Someday, we, apples, will be only ones left. Then we will rule the world." And replied the second apple, "Which of us, red or green?" That's a beautiful example of our approach often in life, you see. We are so bent on differences, yes? On different understandings, on different approaches. Today I would like to speak with you about Revelation chapter 3 and verses 14 through 22. And you will wonder, how is Alex in the world pulling together racism and the Laodicean message? But it's perfectly goes together, specifically the way we are applying in our circles the message of Laodicea. So let us read about lukewarm church, chapter 3 and verse 14. "And to the angel of the church of Laodiceans write, These things says a man, faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of the world. I know your works, that you are neither cold or hot. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold or hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich, have become wealthy, and have need of nothing, and do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich, and white garment, that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see." So, Laodicean message. How many of you are familiar with this message? How many of you have been called by Laodiceans? How do you feel when you get called Laodicean? Is it you get that warm, fuzzy feeling? No. It's not comfortable to get called, "Ah, you are part of Laodicean church, yeah? And that's what I want to talk today, because we often discriminate against ourselves and others when we call others Laodiceans. And when we call Laodiceans, we have all this meaning of like, you are warm, you are naked, you are blind. You know, if you come and tell somebody you are naked, you are blind, you are this and that, it doesn't sound so good, yeah? But we feel okay during our Sabbath school, during our sermons, to say it loud, you are Laodiceans, yes? And I think it's a discrimination. And I think it's inappropriate usage of the message of the true witness. And that's why today we will be looking a little bit in the Bible and in the spirit of prophecy to see what it was the true meaning when Jesus shared the message to the Laodiceans. And what is the reason for that message? I'll give you just a little bit of the preview. It says in Spirit of Prophecy, Testimonies to the Church, Volume 7, Laodicean message has been sounding. Take this message in all its phases and sound it forth to the people wherever providence opens the way. So the Bible teaches us today to preach what message? Laodicean message. Spirit of prophecy tells us to preach to every open door. Would you in your good mind go at work and start preaching to people this message? To unbelievers? Laodicean message? How many of you would open Revelation and start reading and tell them, you say you're rich, wealthy, and you have need of nothing, and you know that you're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? How many of you? You wouldn't go, yeah? It's not a pleasant message. So why is Spirit of Prophecy says that? Because look what is at the root of the message of the to the Laodicean church. Justification by faith and righteousness of Christ are the themes to be presented to the perishing world. And you can look up this paragraph. I read multiple times, and I read in a whole chapter in a setting how it's set together. It actually means it, that the message to the Laodicean church is the message of justification by faith and righteousness of Christ. Message to the Laodicean church is the message of justification by faith and righteousness of Christ. To better understand this, let us look a little bit historically what was the Laodicean church, where it was located. Let's look at the historic. So Laodicea, it's a grim description of this church in the Bible. But what was it in the ancient world? There was around 6 cities that was called Laodicea in the history, through the history of the ancient world. But Laodicea on the river Lucus is distinguished from all other Laodiceans churches or cities of that time. It was founded in 250 BC by Antiochus of Syria and named after his wife, Laodice. So it's started as a normal city, nothing wrong with that city. Actually, the man established a city and named after his wife. What was important about this city was the position of this city. The road from Ephesus to East Syria, the one was the most important road of that time. Because you know, along the roads at that time was what's happening? Trade. And if you're located on the trade route, you have opportunity to be wealthy, you have opportunity to participate in that trade. Only this one route was enough to make this city prosperous. But there was actually 2 more roads, trade routes, that were going through this city. So in total was 3 trade routes that would go through city of Laodicea, which almost made a strategic center of ancient world. As a city, Laodicea was constructed as a fortress to be a strong city, but it had a weak spot. The weak spot was that its water supply. It had to be channeled over like a 6 miles, and enemy, if they would to surround the city, they could always cut off the water, and that would make the city not able to withstand the siege. The second 2 roads that went through Laodicea was from Pergamus to Hermus Valley, and another one from Pisidla to Pamphylia. So there was these 3 routes. And Ramsey, historian, says it only needed a peace to make Laodicea a great commercial and financial center. And guess what happened? The Rome came to power. And when Rome came to power, it gave peace. Although it conquered all the nations, but in the Roman Empire there was a peace for people to do their trading and so like living. So there was 3 interesting things about this city. It had a great banking and financial. It was a great banking and financial center. It even mentions in the history Cicero, when he was traveled to Asia Minor, in Laodicea, he cashed his letters of credit. Like our checks today, they had letters of credit. So that was a big banking financial center. It was one of the wealthiest cities in the world. In AD 61, it was devastated by earthquake, but so rich and independent were its citizens that they refused any help from Roman government and out of their own resources rebuilt the city. You see, they were rich. The city, they had a good money, and they didn't want any Roman government, as you know, like FEMA today. When we have some devastation, FEMA comes and the federal money, that's a federal. But there are so many things we don't know about before federal government gives money. They have so many different requirements that the states or cities, they need to follow unless they will not get those assistance. But they said, we don't need your help. We are rich. Sounds like Laodicea, yes? We have money, we can pay for it. Tacitus wrote, one of the most famous cities in Asia, Laodicea, in the same year overthrown by earthquake and without any relief from us, recovered itself by its own resources. So they were rich. The second thing, they were great center of clothing manufacture. The sheep which glazed around Laodicea were famous for their soft, violet black, glossy wool. It mass-produced cheap outer garments. It was specially connected with a tunic called trimita. So much so, indeed, that it was sometimes called trimitaria. Laodicea was so proud of its garments, it produced that it never realized it was naked in the sight of God. So, first thing was a banking. They had a good banking system. Second thing, they had a wonderful sheep. Black. Did you notice the color of that? They were black, and they were producing outer garments. And the third thing about Laodicea, can you guess what is the third description now? It was very considerable medical center. Banking, fashion, medicine. 13 miles to the west between Laodicea and Gate of Phrygia stood a temple of Carian God-man. Temple was the center of a medical school, which was transferred to Laodicea later. It was famous for its doctors. Laodicea was famous for its doctors. Some of the names of these doctors appear on the coins of Laodicea. Money that they printed, they had faces of those doctors. 2 of them were called Zixius and Alexander Philaletus. Maybe for those who know medical doctors, you know them, but they were famous. The medical school was famous for two things through the world: ointment for the ear and ointment for the eyes. King James and Revised Standard Version speak of eye salve. The word for salve is in Greek kolorion, which literally means the little roll of bread. These tablets or eye salve, the little rolls of bread, they were explored all around the world as a little tablets, which were like rolled in the shape of little breads. So interesting to me, you see, we always, when we read the message to Laodiceans, we always wonder why God used it, and we have spiritual application for that. I'm not trying to preach today against any of the teaching that we have, yes? But one thing I want to make sure that lots of people call, certain churches seventh, first, third church. We're not the Laodicean church today. That's what I'm trying to say. We're not the church of Laodicea. We live in Laodicean period, prophetically speaking, okay? So many people try to apply these things, that we are lost, we're cold, we're destroyed. The reason that Christ sent a message to Laodicea in these actual words was the same reason, the reason he preached on the hills of Galilee. And when he preached on the hills of Galilee, what did he use as examples? Parables of everyday life. So when he preached to Laodiceans, or the message was sent through John to Laodicea, it was not a message of discouragement. It was not a message of discrimination. It was a message of what? Of hope. Because they could understand what God is preaching about, what God is talking about, and that they could apply that spiritually. You see, because they were familiar with their banking system, because they lived in Laodicea, they were familiar with their medicine, because they lived, and they can apply that in everyday life. So today, when we preach message when we want to tell somebody you are living in a period of Laodicea, we cannot call them with these discriminative or bad qualities. We need to preach to them something that would what? Bring them closer to Christ, give them hope. And only hope and blessing is what? Justification by faith. Remember we read in the beginning. And the righteousness of Christ. The themes that we are to present to people. So how are we going to preach a message of Christ? Of Laodicea? By preaching Christ. Justification by faith. Sometimes we like to shock people, yes? We want to sound something that would really wake them up. And that's okay, as long as we're not discriminating on a spiritual basis. You see, the spirit of prophecy said, I ask meaning of the shaking I had seen. There is a shaking, we know in Revelation, yes? And that's another whole subject we can talk about. But why sometimes God gives a shaking? Why sometimes we get events that happening in this world? I had seen and was shown that it would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the council of the true witness to the Laodiceans. This will have its effect upon the hearts of the receiver, and will lead him to exalt the standard and put forth the straight truth. So what is the reason for us to preach the Laodicean message? To have effects on the heart, to wake up people and exalt the standard and put forth the truth. But it says also at the same time, some will not bear this straight testimony. They will rise up against it. And this will cause a shaking among God's people. See, misunderstanding of the message like Laodicean message can cause a shaking among God's people. Because when people take a certain message from the Bible, be it prophecy or a parable or something, and try to apply just to preach their own message or their own view, it will not always go well. And we cannot use this message just to destroy or discourage people. The Laodicean message is a message of hope. It's a message of hope to those people who live in Laodicean period. You see, if you look at Laodicea, we just know that it's a famous message to Laodicea in Revelation. Do you know that Laodicea had a message before addressed to them? 30 years before Revelation was written, somebody else addressed Laodiceans. Can you guess who? Let's open Colossians 4:17. It says, say to Archippus, see that you fulfill the ministry which you have received from the Lord. Who was this person, Archippus? Colossians verse 4, chapter 4 and 17. Now, when this epistle is read among you, see that it is read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you likewise read the epistle from Laodicea. So you see, Laodiceans, they had a message already before Revelation. And historians, they say that it was 30 years apart. Approximately. Apostle Paul already wrote a message to whom? To Colossians. And then he said, take this message. It also applies to Laodiceans. And this Archippus, from the text, it looks like he was the church leader in Laodicea. He was a church leader of that church. And what Apostle Paul tells him 30 years before Revelation? Take heed to the ministry which you have received in the Lord, that you may fulfill it. Brothers and sisters, before message to Laodicea comes to you and me, God reaches to us through different avenue that we don't get into the condition of Laodicea. You see, if this church leader or bishop or whoever he was, however he was called, but he was working in Laodicea, if he heeded the message of Paul, maybe the Revelation 14 would not happen. Do you believe in that? The only reason Revelation 14 happened is because they didn't pay attention to the epistle that Paul wrote to them. It even seems that their message was that Colossians were supposed to be reading because that message that was written to Laodiceans. We don't know everything. We don't know all the messages that were lost through the history that Paul could have written in different apostles. That time, and Apostle Paul, he spent considerable effort to prevent Laodicean condition of that time. What led in these Bible verses, considered by many scholars, even though it's written to Colossians, but if you read Colossians, it's the same message that went to Laodiceans, yes? So we are today who live in the period of Laodicea, what do we need to read for us? Colossians. Because we're living in the conditions of Laodicea today. We can experience and what things happen and were important for that time, they are also apply for me, yes? Look in the spirit of prophecy, he says about Colossians, what was their condition? Surrounded by practices and influence of heathenism, the Colossians believers were in danger of being drawn away from the simplicity of the gospel. So what is the danger of Laodicean period? Colossians, Laodiceans of that time, Church of Laodicea, 7th church, and us who live in the 7th, so to say, period of earth history. What is our danger? We are surrounded all of by what? You see, Colossians, Laodicea, they were not located geographically in Israel, so to say. They were around heathenism. We call that world today, yes? And as we are surrounded by the world, what happens with us? We are drawn from simplicity of the gospel. And Paul, in warning them against this, pointed them to Christ as the only safe guide. I would that you know what great conflict I have for you and for them in Laodicea, and for as many as have not seen my face in the flesh, that their hearts might be comforted, being knit together in love, and into all riches of the full assurance of understanding, to acknowledgement of mystery of God, and of the Father, and of the Christ, in whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So what is only safeguard for Laodiceans? You see, Apostle Paul, he was writing to them. Knit together in love and assurance and understanding of mystery of God. And we continue, it says here, as ye have therefore received, it's Acts of Apostles actually, page 473 if you want to find and read all the chapter here. It says, 473, second paragraph, as ye have therefore received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk ye in him, rooted and built up in him. See, Apostle Paul saw the issue that is coming to Laodicea. People received Christ, but they were not rooted in Christ. See, today our issue is also can be similar as a church, as a reform movement. We received a message, we received light, but if we are not rooted in that, then what happens with us? Here it took 30 years. How long does the Reform Movement Church exist? How long does the Seventh-day Adventist movement exist? More than 30 years, yes? Way more. Do you think the possibility of becoming Laodiceans is realistic for us today? Yes. The reason is that we receive Christ, yes, we called Christians, like John preached in his sermon, about name, Christianity, and about not using the name of God in vain. We received name, but we're not rooted into that name with all that meaning. Beware lest any man spoil you through the philosophy, vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. What happens with Laodiceans? What is the danger of Laodiceans? Oh, we have money, yes? We don't need money from Rome. Do we have clothing? Oh, yes, look at our beautiful ship. We have clothing. Yeah? Do we have medicine? Oh, yeah. We are. When I read this message, when I study for a sermon today, so much reminds me about United States of America. Where God revealed the message, the last message about Sabbath and about the Adventist movement started. Where did it all started? In the United States, here. And you see, United States resembles so much Laodicea. We have everything here now, yes? And that condition spread around the world. People right now, they're not concerned about simple things like it used to be. We have everything. But spiritually speaking, what is this? Philosophy, vain deceit, tradition of man, regiments of the world, and things that not from the Christ. The things that we are teaching. That's why often we take the message of Laodicea and we try to spoil this message. Instead of making message of hope and salvation, we make a message of destruction. You're cold. And what the Lord will do with you? He will spit you out of his mouth. Yeah? And that's what happens with many. Those who follow the tradition of the world, it says, many profess to be looking at speedily coming of Christ, becoming conformed to this world, and seek more earnestly the applause of those around them than approbation of God. What are we concerned about? What people around us thinking? Or what God thinks about us? What is more important? They are cold and formal, like the nominal churches, from which they but a short time since separated. And Ellen White wrote this not that long time ago, but it is already over 100 years. And she was talking about Adventist movement who just came out of all the different churches, but they became just like those churches. Us coming out from somewhere or calling us a different name doesn't make us a different people, yeah? If we become by condition same like the nominal churches of the world. There are so many other examples I wanted to share with you today, but time is short, and I will just try to skip here. When we go to section and talk about here, because you say I am rich, what does it mean? What does it mean to be rich? Wealth can do many things in this life, but can never do certain things. It cannot buy happiness, yeah? It cannot give a health to the body or mind, yes? It cannot bring comfort, not fellowship in loneliness. It cannot give you peace. So wealth is not everything, if we think about it. 1 Peter 1:7 says that the genuineness of your faith being much more precious than gold that perishes. Through it tested by fire may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. The true value is not in the money, but is what? The gold that the council advises us to buy, which is faith, our faith in Jesus Christ. The gold tried in the fire is faith that works by love. Let's remember that. Faith that works by love. This is our true richness, yeah? I'll skip now to white raiment. Laodiceans, they were proud of their clothing because they had cheap and wonderful, but those garments were not considered to be the garments that Christ wants to give us. I'm not going to stop much on this one because last week we heard a study about garments. You remember the sermon of last week? Yes? But the clothing that God is offering us here in Revelation is more important. It says, I will not let nations look at your nakedness and on your kingdom's shame. Okay? And we know that in the Bible, it was a special, to give somebody a special clothing, yes? To make somebody, we know Daniel got clothing, Joseph, and we know many examples. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in a white raiment. And I will not blot out his name of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And you know, the third thing, it's medicine mentioned here. What is our medicine today? God offers us an eye salve to clear our vision. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 10 and 11 says, but God has revealed them to us through his Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. So God's Spirit can open our eyes, yes? The fear of the Lord, Psalm 111 and 10 says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do his commandments. His praise and endures forever. So, what is our message today? The message to the Laodicea, is it a message of discouragement, discrimination? This is a message of hope. 30 years before, the message was given to give them chance not to become in that condition. But when they become lukewarm, yes? And it's better to be cold or hot. And unfortunately, our time is not giving us, but next time when we get together and I have opportunity to study, we will look at the condition. What does it mean to be cold or hot or lukewarm? One thing I will give you, it's also related to the water that was in Laodicea. You see how God in his mercy approaches them, because the water was a mineral water that they were receiving through aqueducts For 6 miles, remember I told you, was water coming from outside. And that mineral water was coming off the ground like kind of our springs here in the mountains. It was warm. And by the time it got to the city, it warmed up in those. So they had a good understanding of what does it mean to drink lukewarm water. That's why God gave them message. But this message ends with the verse 20, and it says in Revelation 20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and dine with him and he with me." So the message to Laodicea ends with what? It's not yet over. I am standing at the door. If you found yourself in the condition of Laodicea, if you feel that you're rich, that you're closed, and you don't need anything, then there is still time to open the door, because Jesus is still knocking at the door. We are living in that time that we need to open that door and let Jesus in. Amen.